Myself, I'm not an artist, I mean, not in that sense, but I come from the field of neuroscience, and I will give you a neuroscientific perspective on that. So the key message that I will be talking about is how can you unlock the truest expression of who you are in your art. And to have an understanding of how I have approached this topic, I'd like to start with giving you a definition of performance, where performance here in this case stands for your artistic performance. This is the piece of art that eventually you bring. And the performance that we bring stands for the potential that we have minus our internal interferences or blockages. And what's the potential? The potential that you have at this very moment, these are your talents. These are your skills. This is what you can do at this very moment, your expertise, your experiences. But I'm quite sure you've noticed that in certain circumstances, we are not able to fully access our potential because we are being blocked in our potential by the so-called internal interferences or internal blockages. It's this block that we feel, and somehow we cannot fully bring out what it is we have inside of us. Let me give you two examples. One example not related to painting or drawing, but let's just assume for a moment that we all have a good potential to sing. So let's say that you have, let me just check, somebody's writing here to me. I hope everything is fine. Okay, this was just a technical message. So the first example is, let's say that we all have a potential to sing. So all of you here, either in the virtual room or in the conference room, you have a particular potential to sing. And this morning, when you were in the shower and you were alone, you were singing, and what happened? You brought your absolute best performance. But then here on this conference, somebody would unmute yourself, somebody would put on your camera, and very unexpected, you would be asked to sing a song for all of us. Well, what is going to happen, you believe? It is very likely that all of a sudden your brain is going to produce those internal blockages, and that your performance that you bring here in this conference is not going to be the same performance as the one you brought in the shower when you were alone. And my question to you is, did you lose your potential from the way to the shower all the way to the conference? Well, no, you did not lose your potential. You still have your potential to sing at this very moment, but all of a sudden your brain started to produce those internal interferences. And the same is also what happens when we are producing a different type of art. I mean, singing is also a particular way of expressing yourself, but also different types of art. We've noticed that sometimes you really have this great access to your potential, and sometimes you're really feeling blocked in your potential. For example, you are reasoning too much with yourself, you have these feelings of insecurity, perhaps it's also a feeling of shame or a lack of self-confidence. So all of a sudden, your brain produces those internal interferences and blocks you in your potential to produce something. So what do we need then to gain a better access to our potential? Well, we need a capacity, a skill that is called self-regulation. And later on in the day, there is one of my colleagues and friend who is going to present, and I'm quite sure she's also going to introduce this to you. But self-regulation really is a very important skill to down-regulate your internal blockages and free yourself or unchain yourself, so to say, so you can access your own potential much better. So let me put that in the context of art. You can already guess how this could look like. But let's say you're being asked to produce a piece of art. What is going to happen? Let's say this is not your very best day. Well, very automatically, your brain will produce a certain automatic reaction tendency. And on those days where things don't run the way we want them to run, it might be that your brain produces a feeling of insecurity or perhaps a feeling of a lack of self-confidence, and all of a sudden it becomes very difficult to tap into our own potential to produce art. So what is going to happen if we're in a situation like that? We might get really frustrated. We might either not produce something we're happy with, or it also might be that we are just giving a bad performance or perhaps not even bring a piece of art. Now, self-regulation as a skill allows us to recognize those internal interferences, this automatic reaction tendency, and allows us to regulate them and reduce those internal blockages so we can tap into our potential, in this case, to bring art. And this will allow us to bring out our authenticity in our artistic activities. So this is how self-regulation works. We have a situation, our brain reacts to the situation, and if this automatic reaction tendency is a negative one that is going to block you in your potential, we will need self-regulation to regulate this automatic reaction tendency so we can bring out our authenticity in our piece of art. Now, how does that work into the brain? Because I really want to give you a neuroscientific point of view on that, and I also would like to offer you one solution with which we can reduce those internal interferences. Many of those internal interferences that block us in a negative way in our potential are caused by too much activation in a particular brain structure. And this brain structure is called the amygdala, or almond-shaped brain structure. And the amygdala, they're very small, very deep inside our brain, and we need them. They're very important for our survival. They're important for our, many parts of our emotional life. But if they become too active, they can cause feelings of stress, feelings of insecurity. And what happens if that's the case, then they can block us in our potential to be creative or to bring a certain kind of piece of art. So the amygdala, in short, we need them, but also if they're too active and they cause these feelings of stress or insecurity, this is where there are going to be internal blockages of our potential. For our potential, on the other hand, we need our prefrontal cortex. That's a different part of the brain, which is fully in front of the brain. And this part of the brain is, I would say, important for pretty much every task that you have to complete throughout a normal working day. So what does the prefrontal cortex, or where is it involved in? It's involved in your cognitive tasks, such as reasoning, analyzing information, problem solving, listening to what I have to say now and interpreting what I have to say now, or holding a presentation. So your prefrontal cortex is very, very busy throughout the normal working day. Now, the bad news is, and I'm quite sure you've noticed it already, but the prefrontal cortex has a limited capacity. It works a bit like a mental battery. So if this mental battery is fully charged, it might feel very easy to engage in particular tasks, to solve problems, to fully use your potential for certain tasks. But the more we use this mental battery, the more difficult or the more challenging it will be to engage in these certain tasks. So ideally, what we want, if we want to really constructively deal with comments or show our creative side, we don't need to have too much of amygdala activation leading to internal blockages. And ideally, we also have a prefrontal cortex that is fully charged. So, but let me show you then what happens in those two brain areas during a normal working day. So during a normal working day, I'm going to describe you one that starts in the morning, that ends in the evening, and I'm going to show you on my slides here as a metaphor what happens in the amygdala area and what also happens in the prefrontal cortex area. And we know now that too much unwanted amygdala activation is going to lead to those internal blockages that can really block us in our own authentic potential. Now, let's say that you wake up, and when you've woken up and you haven't slept enough, what you will see is that the prefrontal cortex is not fully charged. You wake up and it's raining outside, it's windy outside, so it brings a bit you in the bad mood. and you have 2 children. The youngest girl, she's 2 years old, and even though it's raining outside, she absolutely insists on putting a summer dress. So for those of you who have young children at home, this really can be a theater. And this entire theater, of course, is already triggering your amygdala, and you're already using capacity of your mental battery. But the day goes on, you're stuck in traffic. And if you're stuck in traffic, you know, this is unpleasant, stressful for many people. Also here, you use your prefrontal cortex. But then finally, you are at work, if you're even allowed to be at work those days. But let me summarize your working day as follows. It doesn't really matter what it is that you do, but I would say that most of us, especially on those days where things don't go the way we want them to go, well, on those days especially, we use our prefrontal cortex absolutely like crazy, and the amygdala starts to rise. So after a really busy day, then finally you are home, and look at the mental state here. The amygdala is having free play, and our prefrontal cortex has reached its limits. Now, remember what I told you at the start, you know, we want to have the amygdala not too active, not unnecessarily too active, because this leads to the internal blockages. And we want to have a prefrontal cortex that is fully charged. But look at this mental state here. I mean, if this is our mental state when we get home, well, let me tell you a secret. This is not just happening to you. This is happening to your husband, to your wife, and especially this is happening to children, because their prefrontal cortex is still very small and very quickly empty. So if you put all those people into a household, especially during times of Corona, where we don't really have many nice sources of positive energy, well, people are not in their mental best state. And if you put all those people together in one household, this can really lead to lots of negative emotions or even fights. And it's exactly at the moment that you think that things can't get any worse. That's the moment that you walk back bare feet onto a Lego brick. And I'm quite sure for those with kids at home, you have Lego, and when you walk on it, this is very painful, especially when we're in a mental state like that. Now, going one slide back, if you're in a mental state like that, where the amygdala is getting free play, and the prefrontal cortex is reaching its limits, this is not a good mental state to be in. And in such stages, we lose connection to ourselves. We don't have access to our authenticity. This is the moment that it seems, a bit spiritually speaking, but we're walking beside us. We're not walking inside of us. We're not connecting to ourselves. So what I was wondering is, what can we do about it? How can we powerfully regulate the amygdala activation, so lower these internal blockages, and at the same time give a boost to the prefrontal cortex? Well, I was looking for such a strategy, and I also found a very powerful strategy that when you regularly practice that, what you see is that the amygdala will become less triggered, less intensely triggered. This means that the largest source of these internal blockages that block you in your potential, your artistic potential in this case, will become smaller, and we will more easily gain access to ourselves, connect to ourselves. The second development is that the functions or many functions of the prefrontal cortex will receive a significant boost, and one of them, which is also investigated separately, is also your creativity. So what is the strategy that I'm talking about here? I'd like to end the presentation with looking at the strategy here and also making a short exercise with you. Well, to have an understanding on how you practice this particular strategy that will strengthen the access to your authentic potential, well, let me first give you a few explanations on what happens inside our brain, and then we'll do an exercise together. In our brain, I'm quite sure you've already noticed, but we have this small little voice that is constantly talking to us. It's this voice that is telling us what to do, what to think about ourselves, about others, about the past, about the future. And this voice, some people call that the monkey in the mind, but in neuroscience, we call that the default mode network. This network in your brain is a very dominant one and is constantly producing thoughts about you, about others, about the past, about the future. And it's also these thoughts that eventually will trigger your amygdala a lot, those internal blockages. We feel stressed because we interpret something as being stressful. We, for example, create feelings of insecurity when we're trying to perform art by thinking about situations. So this is the default mode network, or the monkey in our mind. Now, for this strategy, which we will practice in a moment, we are going to activate a different network in our brain. It is a network that is called the direct experience network. And this is a network that when we activate it, what is going to happen in our brain is the default mode network, or the monkey mind, will deactivate. And this is because these two brain networks cannot be activated fully together. So when you activate one of these networks, the other one will be deactivated. So to calm down those thoughts, to reduce the voice of the monkey, you activate the direct experience network. This is the core of this strategy. Now, this direct experience network, how do you activate that? Well, this is a network that is in very close connection to your senses. What are your senses? As many of you probably are in connection with art or artists, you use your senses to feel and to see and to hear and to smell and to taste. These are your senses. And when you bring your full awareness right here and right now to one of your senses, then in your brain you will activate the direct experience network. And as a biological consequence, the default mode network will be deactivated. And this is exactly what you do with the strategy. So you very consciously bring your full awareness to what your senses are experiencing right here and right now, what you feel, what you see, what you smell, what you taste. And by doing that, the monkey mind will calm down. We will practice together a very short exercise, also because I'm very limited in time. I still have about 8 minutes and I still like to say a few words about that for closing. But it actually makes sense to make a short exercise together. So wherever you are, it would be great. I invite you to perform this exercise together with me. And we are all going to activate the direct experience network together by bringing our full awareness to our breathing. Because the breathing, there is some movement. There is also just the feeling of the air going in and inside. And by bringing your full awareness to your breathing, just simply being aware of it, you will activate your direct experience network. The monkey mind will be quiet, but probably after a few milliseconds or perhaps a second, the monkey mind will start chatting again in your mind, right? That's okay. If the monkey mind is active again, this is for us a sign to very consciously bring our full awareness back to our breathing. This is not an easy exercise. It's not a relaxation exercise. This is a conscious exercise, okay? So in order to do that, I invite all of you to an exercise which will last about a minute. And for this exercise, I also invite you to sit up straight so that at least you can fully breathe in and out. And you can start by closing your eyes, because if your eyes are open, your monkey mind will be very much triggered. And now I invite you just for 1 minute, very gently bring your full awareness to your breath without trying to change it, just simply being aware of it. And now with the next out breath, just in your own time, you open your eyes again. I hope you're all still here. And also I hope you didn't fall asleep. If you did, then I have one recommendation, and this is to sleep, because this means you're tired. So what's this strategy called here? We've only performed a very short exercise, but the strategy that we performed here together is called mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness meditation. And if we regularly practice mindfulness meditation, for example, minding the breath or bringing your awareness to your senses right here and right now. I had to think of that when Robin was talking about postmodernism, which is about here and now, not about the past or future. So bringing your awareness to your senses right here and right now. With this technique, with mindfulness, you will activate the direct experience network and the monkey mind will become quiet. And you constantly switch those networks between one session, whether you practice for 1 minute or whether you practice for 5 minutes or 20 minutes, you will always switch between those two networks. And when you regularly do that, we see many effects that have been supported by science. We see cognitive effects. This means that, your cognitive performance will improve, your creativity, your decision-making will become better. So many cognitive effects have been shown to improve. You also see many emotional effects. And especially, being blocked by negative emotions, feelings of insecurity, feelings of or lack of self-confidence. These are emotional states that will significantly improve when you regularly practice mindfulness. And last but not least, we also have many social effects. They probably don't come straight away, but one of the effects is that people start to listen to understand and not to reply. So people will start to listen to understand and not to reply. So this, in a nutshell, this is the neuroscience of how can you reconnect with your authentic self. Also, who you are is not necessarily always what's cognitively happening, but your own state is really present in your full body. And with mindfulness, you can become much more aware of what's happening inside your body, and you can also be able to regulate it much better and reduce those internal blockages that block you in your authentic self or your creativity. So what's the big secret behind it? So if you say, okay, I'd like to try it out, what do I need to do then? Well, I have one big secret for you. And this is practice, practice, practice. Mindfulness, for those especially who've already tried it, I'm quite sure you can confirm that it's about practicing. It's better to do this 5 minutes per day than to do this a full hour during the weekend. Practice, practice, practice really is the key to reduce those internal blockages. So how do you unlock the authentic artist inside of you? Well, what I've come to learn from a neuroscientific point of view is that mindfulness can be of a great help here. So thank you so much for your attention and engaging in the exercise.